Adrian Vale put his husband between himself and 3 men who wanted to destroy him, because no one in the room believed Elliot Vale mattered enough to be dangerous. The choice was so deliberate that Elliot felt it before Adrien even touched his back. One firm hand guided him half a step forward at the private reception outside Vale Meridian's executive boardroom, placing Elliot directly between Adrien and the representatives of Northstar Capital. Cameras waited beyond the glass doors. Investors watched from carefully chosen corners. Every smile in the room had a price attached to it. "Stay close," Adrien murmured. To anyone else, it might have sounded protective. Elliot knew better. Adrien wanted the image, the ruthless alpha CEO, standing beside his quiet, unremarkable husband while hostile investors tried to paint him as unstable, aggressive, impossible to negotiate with. Nobody attacked a man holding his spouse's hand on camera. Elliot was camouflaged in a charcoal suit. He had been useful in less flattering ways before. "How romantic," Elliot said softly. Adrien's mouth barely moved. "You married me knowing I wasn't romantic. I was referring to being deployed as furniture." For the first time that evening, Adrien looked directly at him. The glance lasted only a second, but it carried the faint irritation Elliot had learned to recognize as interest. Then Victor Hale approached. Northstar's lead negotiator was silver-haired, expensive, and smiling with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the building would belong to him soon. "Adrien." His gaze slid to Elliot and softened into something almost patronizing. "And your husband?" "Of course." Elliot offered the harmless smile people expected from him. It had become easy over the years. The trick was never to resent being underestimated while it was happening. Resentment made people careful. "Mr. Hale, you must find all this exhausting." Victor gestured toward the boardroom, where Vale Meridian's directors were gathering for the emergency vote. "Adrien does have a talent for making simple problems dramatic." Adrien's alpha presence sharpened beside Elliot, subtle but unmistakable, the pressure in the air changing just enough that 2 nearby executives suddenly became interested in their drinks. Elliot put 2 fingers against Adrien's coffee cup. "It's getting cold." Adrien glanced down. The pressure eased. Victor laughed, apparently delighted by the domestic interruption. That was when Elliot noticed the folder under Victor's arm. Northstar's proposal packets were blue. Elliot had seen 6 of them carried into the building that afternoon. Victor's folder was gray, stamped with a small white triangle near the binding. Vale Meridian used that mark only on internal compliance documents. Elliot's attention shifted to the woman standing behind Victor. She wasn't looking at Adrien. She was watching the security desk, then the elevator numbers, then Adrien's chief legal officer. Not once did she look toward the boardroom she had supposedly flown across the country to enter. Elliot leaned slightly toward his husband. "Don't sign anything they put in front of you tonight." Adrien kept smiling for the room. That was already the plan. "No. Cancel the vote." The smile remained, but his eyes changed. "Elliot, Victor has an internal compliance file. Either someone on your side gave it to him, or he wants us to believe they did. The woman behind him isn't here for the vote. She's waiting for someone to leave." Adrien finally turned his head. Not enough to draw attention, only enough to study Elliot's face. "You're sure?" Elliot hated how much that question affected him. Adrien rarely asked whether he was sure. Usually Adrien decided what Elliot needed, where Elliot should stand, which events required his presence, and when his opinion could be safely ignored. Being consulted should not have felt like kindness. "I'm sure enough that I wouldn't bet your company against it." Adrien looked past him toward Victor, then toward the gray folder. His expression did not change. His hand, however, left Elliot's back. "Mara," he called to his chief of staff. She crossed the room immediately. "Delay the vote. Lock access to compliance records and keep every director on this floor until legal clears them." Victor's smile vanished. Only for a moment. It was enough. 10 minutes later, security intercepted a Vale Meridian director trying to leave through the private garage with a signed proxy agreement transferring his voting rights to Northstar. The emergency vote would have given that proxy decisive weight. Adrien stood behind the security glass as the document was sealed into an evidence bag. Elliot remained near the wall, where husbands like him were expected to wait quietly while important men dealt with important things. Victor Hale passed on his way to the elevators. He stopped beside Elliot. This time, there was nothing patronizing in his face. "You saw the folder." Elliot said nothing. Victor studied him with a new, careful stillness. "Interesting." Then he walked away. Across the lobby, Adrien was no longer watching the traitorous director. He was watching Elliot. Elliot reached automatically for the crooked folder someone had left on the console beside him, straightened it by half an inch, and stopped when he realized Adrien had noticed. For years, Adrian Vale had kept a plain husband at his side because invisible men made excellent shields. Tonight, one of his enemies had looked at Elliot as if he had just discovered the shield could see him coming. By 9 the next morning, the director caught with Northstar's proxy had been suspended. Vale Meridian's compliance servers were under forensic review, and Adrien had turned the 38th floor into a controlled zone where nobody entered without clearance. Elliot expected to be sent home. Instead, Adrien placed a visitor badge on the desk in front of him. "You're coming with me." Elliot looked at the badge, then at his husband. "Yesterday I was furniture. Today I need credentials." "Yesterday, nobody was watching you." Adrien slid a second file across the desk. That changed. Inside was a list of Vale Meridian's largest institutional investors. One name had been marked in red: Calder Pension Trust, whose representatives controlled enough shares to make the coming confidence vote dangerous. A note from Adrien's chief of staff sat beneath it. Calder had canceled its scheduled meeting with Vale Meridian and requested a private conversation with Northstar instead. Victor moved quickly, Elliot said. He didn't have to. Adrien leaned against the edge of his desk, arms folded. Calder contacted him first. That changed the shape of the problem. Elliot read the note again. Calder had supported Adrien through 2 ugly restructuring fights and a regulatory inquiry. Their chairman, Martin Shaw, disliked volatility but hated opportunists more. Walking directly to Northstar after yesterday's failed proxy move made no sense. Elliot reached for the investor list and noticed Adrien watching his hands. He stopped before straightening the corner of the paper. "What?" "Nothing." Adrien's expression was too neutral. "You were about to fix it." Elliot looked at the crooked stack. "It's distracting." Apparently, there was the faintest trace of amusement in Adrien's voice, so out of place after the previous night that Elliot almost smiled. Then he saw another name on the page. Who spoke to Calder after the vote was delayed? Investor relations. Legal. Mara. In that order? Adrien's attention sharpened. Why? Elliot tapped the timeline. Because Martin Shaw doesn't punish people for scandal. He punishes people for making him feel managed. Adrien pushed away from the desk. That's an unusually specific distinction. It's also an important one. Elliot remembered a charity dinner 18 months earlier. One Adrien had left after 20 minutes because an acquisition call came in. Martin had stayed. Everyone else at the table had spent the evening explaining markets to him, as if managing pension money for 40 years had made him fragile. Elliot had asked about his wife's community clinic instead. Martin had talked for an hour. Adrien had probably forgotten the dinner entirely. Elliot hadn't. If your team called him with prepared assurances before he asked for any, Elliot continued, he'll assume you're hiding something bigger. Adrien's jaw tightened. We were trying to prevent exactly that. Then stop preventing it. Adrien gave him a flat look. That sounds like advice designed to shorten my career. Call him yourself. No lawyers. No investor relations language. Tell him exactly what happened, including what you don't know yet. And if he uses it against us, then at least you'll lose him honestly. Silence settled between them. Adrien was very good at silence. In boardrooms, he used it like pressure, letting other people rush to fill the space and reveal more than they meant to. Elliot had learned years ago not to rescue him from it. Finally, Adrien picked up his phone. Stay. The single word landed differently than it usually did. Not an order to remain decorative. Not quite a request either, but closer. Adrien called Martin Shaw and, for once, did not perform certainty. He admitted the proxy breach, the internal leak, and the fact that Vale Meridian still did not know how Northstar had obtained a compliance file. Martin listened without interrupting. When Adrien finished, the older man's voice came through the speaker, dry and unimpressed. That's the first useful thing anyone from your company has said to me since yesterday. Adrien glanced at Elliot. Martin continued. Your legal team sent me 12 pages explaining why nothing had happened before your own security people finished confirming that something had. They were attempting to reassure you. They were attempting to control my reaction. Elliot saw Adrien absorb the wording. Control. The same instinct wearing a more respectable suit. Then Martin said, I'll postpone the Northstar meeting. 48 hours. After that, I make my decision. It was not loyalty, but it was time, and time had become expensive. Adrien ended the call slowly. You knew he would respond that way. I thought he might. That isn't the same thing. Elliot closed the folder. People tell you what they value all the time. Most powerful men are too busy deciding whether it can be bought to listen. Something shifted in Adrien's face, small enough that anyone else might have missed it. And you listen? People usually forget I'm there. Elliot meant it lightly, but the words landed with more weight than he intended. Adrian's gaze stayed on him a second too long. Elliot looked away first. By noon, Calder had formally delayed its decision, and two smaller funds followed. The immediate danger eased, but another problem emerged. Mara entered Adrian's office carrying a tablet, her expression unusually careful. Northstar changed its outreach list. They're contacting spouses, assistants, former staff, anyone they think has informal access to our site. Adrien went very still. Because of Elliot? Because of what happened last night. Mara turned the tablet around. And because Calder's office logged a private call from this floor before postponing their meeting. Elliot felt the pressure in the room change. His invisibility had lasted exactly 1 day after becoming useful. Adrien took the tablet, scanned the names, then looked at Elliot with the cold focus he usually reserved for hostile acquisitions. From now on, you don't attend anything without telling me first. Elliot's expression cooled. That sounds familiar. Adrien heard it too. The line between protection and control had already begun to blur. Before either of them could answer, Mara's phone vibrated. She read the message, then looked directly at Elliot. Martin Shaw's office just sent a follow-up. He doesn't want another meeting with Vale Meridian's executive team. Adrian's mouth hardened. Then what does he want? Mara held out the message. Elliot. Alone. Martin Shaw did not ask Elliot to come alone because he trusted him. He asked because Northstar had already tried to buy that trust. The proof was waiting on the table when Elliot entered Calder Pension Trust's private conference room the next morning. A printed offer from a Northstar subsidiary, addressed to a community health foundation chaired by Martin's wife. $10 million, released only if Calder supported a leadership transition at Vale Meridian. Martin pushed the document across the table. They sent it 6 hours after I postponed my meeting. Elliot read the conditions twice. Northstar had disguised the payment as a charitable partnership, but the timing made its purpose obvious. Have you shown Adrien? No. Martin sat opposite him, gray suit rumpled at the shoulders, looking more tired than the powerful trustee Elliot remembered from that charity dinner. I wanted to know what you would do with it first. Elliot lifted his eyes. That sounds like a test. It is. Through the glass wall, downtown traffic moved far below them. Adrien was 3 floors down in Calder's lobby because Martin had been explicit about the meeting being private. Adrien had disliked that arrangement enough to assign 2 security officers to the building entrance, but he had allowed Elliot to come upstairs alone. Allowed was still the problem, Elliot thought. Progress did not always arrive wearing a different vocabulary. Martin folded his hands. Northstar says Vale Meridian is rotting from the inside. Your director with the proxy suggests they're not entirely wrong. They aren't. The answer surprised him. Most people in your position would defend the company. Most people in my position aren't asked what they think. Martin watched him for a moment, then leaned back. That's why I asked for you. He opened a second folder. Inside were copies of correspondence between Calder and Vale Meridian dating back almost 2 years. Elliot recognized several disputes. Pension obligations during a subsidiary restructuring, layoffs at a logistics division, a proposed clinic closure that Adrian's finance team had called operationally necessary. Beside 3 of them were handwritten notes referencing conversations with Elliot. Elliot stared at the pages. Why do you have these? Because every time Vale Meridian came close to making a decision that would cost my trustees their support, someone eventually remembered there were human beings underneath the numbers. Martin tapped one note. Usually after talking to you. Elliot remembered those conversations, but not as strategy. A phone call with Martin after a fundraiser. Coffee with a union advisor who had looked stranded at one of Adrian's dinners. A message to Mara suggesting that closing the clinic would cost more trust than it saved money. Small things. Things Adrien had never asked him to do. I didn't negotiate any of these agreements. No, Martin said. You made people willing to negotiate them. The distinction landed harder than Elliot expected. His entire marriage had trained him to measure his place by how little space he occupied. Adrien needed a spouse who did not create scandals, demand influence, or compete for attention. Elliot had become very good at being easy to overlook. Apparently, other people had been listening while Adrien wasn't. Martin slid the Northstar offer back toward him. Take that to your husband. Tell him Calder will remain neutral for 48 hours. After that, I want evidence that he understands what Northstar is actually attacking. Vale Meridian's governance. No, Martin's expression hardened. Its relationships. When Elliot returned downstairs, Adrien was standing beside the lobby windows with Mara, reading something on his phone. He looked up before Elliot reached them. His attention went first to Elliot's face, then to the folder in his hand. What happened? Elliot handed him Northstar's offer. Adrien read the first page, and the temperature of his expression seemed to drop several degrees. They tried to bribe Shaw through his wife's foundation. They tried to prove you'd assume money was the point. Adrien looked up. Explain. Martin isn't staying because he trusts Vale Meridian. He's staying because he thinks some people inside it are still worth trusting. Elliot hesitated. Apparently, he thinks I'm one of them. Adrien said nothing. Elliot gave him the correspondence. As Adrien read, his focus changed. The first page brought recognition. The second brought disbelief. By the third, his eyes had stopped moving quickly. The Westbridge pension agreement, he said. Finance told me Calder came back because we improved the reserve guarantee. You did. After you spoke to their advisor. I had coffee with him. And the Mercer Clinic? I told Mara closing it would look like we were making employees pay for an accounting problem. Adrien turned another page. You never told me any of this. Elliot almost laughed, though there was nothing funny in it. You never asked. The words stayed between them. Mara quietly moved several steps away, suddenly fascinated by her tablet. Adrien looked at Elliot with an intensity that was different from the scrutiny of the previous 2 days. This was not the CEO examining an unexpected asset. For one uncomfortable moment, Elliot felt as though Adrien was trying to reconcile the man in front of him with years of assumptions. Elliot reached for the folder in Adrien's hands and straightened its crooked edge. Adrien noticed. You do that every time you're about to tell me something I won't like. Elliot's fingers stopped. You've known me for 4 years and discovered that yesterday. I'm discovering several things late. There was no joke in Adrien's voice this time. He opened the Northstar offer again. I want you in the strategy meeting this afternoon. As your shield? No, Adrien held his gaze. Because I want your judgment. It was such a small correction that Elliot hated how much it mattered. He nodded once. Then give me the same information you give everyone else in that room. Adrien unlocked his phone, opened Vale Meridian's restricted board archive, and held it out. Start here. Elliot took it. Trust, even limited trust, had weight. By the time they reached the car, however, a new message was waiting for Mara. Northstar had withdrawn its charitable offer to Calder. In its place, Victor Hale had contacted 2 other major Vale Meridian stakeholders within minutes of Elliot leaving Martin's office. Both calls had been brief. Both stakeholders had then requested copies of the same old agreements Adrien had just discovered Elliot had quietly helped preserve. Northstar was no longer investigating Adrien's weaknesses. They were mapping Elliot's influence. And for the first time, Adrien was beginning to understand that some of the loyalty he had spent years believing belonged to him might never have been his at all. By the time Adrien's strategy meeting began that afternoon, Northstar had already turned Elliot's quiet influence into a liability. 2 major pension funds froze their pending commitments to Vale Meridian. A regional bank delayed renewal of a credit facility, and an anonymous packet reached 3 business reporters containing selective copies of Elliot's old correspondence with investors. None of the messages proved misconduct. That was what made them useful. They suggested something harder to defend, that the CEO's supposedly uninvolved husband had been shaping corporate relationships from the shadows for years. They're calling him an unregistered intermediary, Mara said, placing the media summaries on the conference table. Northstar's people are implying Adrien used his spouse to bypass disclosure rules. Elliot read one headline twice. Plain husband or secret power broker. The phrase might have been funny if 40,000 Vale Meridian employees were not about to discover how quickly a rumor could become a market event. Adrien stood at the end of the table, silent while legal counsel explained that Elliot should immediately suspend all contact with investors until the company completed an internal review. So Northstar makes an accusation, Elliot said, and our response is to behave as though they proved it. The general counsel stiffened. Our response is to reduce exposure. By removing the person Calder specifically asked to speak with. By preventing another informal conversation from becoming evidence. Adrien's eyes shifted toward Elliot. Yesterday, he might have made the decision without looking at him. Today, he said, what do you think happens if we isolate you? Elliot hated that the question warmed something in him. He kept his voice even. Northstar gets to define what my relationships meant before we do. And if you keep talking to stakeholders, the lawyer cut in. Every word becomes discoverable. Then perhaps we should stop saying things we're afraid to have discovered. A few people around the table looked down. Adrien did not. For the next hour, the room argued around a shrinking set of options. Every conservative legal move weakened stakeholder trust. Every aggressive public response gave Northstar more material to portray Adrien as reckless. By the end, one conclusion remained. Elliot could no longer be invisible, but visibility made him vulnerable in ways Adrien's power could not simply erase. The consequence arrived before the meeting ended. Mara received confirmation that Victor Hale had persuaded the regional bank to suspend the credit renewal pending governance clarification. The delay would not destroy Vale Meridian, but it would tighten cash movement across 3 subsidiaries within days. Northstar had found a way to make Elliot expensive. Adrien dismissed the room except for Elliot and Mara. "We issue a statement tonight," he said. "Legal clears it. Elliot attends nothing public until this is contained." Elliot closed the folder in front of him. "No." Adrien's expression hardened almost by reflex. "This is not about appearances anymore." "Exactly." Elliot pushed the media packet toward him. "They're betting that you'll hide me. The second you do, every stakeholder who trusted me starts wondering whether the accusation is true. And if I don't, Hale keeps targeting you. He already is." Adrien took one step closer. The restrained alpha pressure in the room rose with him, not enough to overwhelm, but enough that Mara quietly gathered her notes and moved toward the door. Elliot remained seated. "You don't get to solve this by putting me somewhere safe and calling it strategy. I'm trying to keep them from turning you into collateral." Elliot looked up at him. "You already did that when you made me your shield." The word stopped Adrien cold. For several seconds, the office seemed too quiet for a building full of crisis. Then Adrien did something Elliot did not expect. He sat down, not behind the desk, beside him. "Then tell me what you want." The difference was small enough that another person might have missed it. Elliot did not. "I want the people they're contacting to hear from me before they hear another version of who I am." Adrien's jaw tightened. "That creates risk. For me. For both of us." Elliot almost corrected him, then stopped. That was new too. Adrien had not said the company. He had said us. By evening, they had agreed on a limited series of direct conversations with stakeholders who already knew Elliot personally. Adrien would not script him. Legal would observe, but not interrupt unless necessary. It was a compromise neither man liked, which Elliot suspected was why it had a chance of being fair. The first call was with the Westbridge Pension Board. Elliot expected suspicion. Instead, the chairwoman sounded irritated on his behalf. "Northstar contacted us this morning," she said. "They wanted copies of every message you ever sent." Elliot glanced at Adrien across the conference table. "Did you provide them?" "We provided nothing." A pause. "Mr. Vale, 3 years ago my deputy wanted to walk away from Vale Meridian after your finance division tried to rewrite our reserve terms. You were the only person from that company who called him afterward without a lawyer on the line." Adrien's focus sharpened. Elliot remembered the call only vaguely. He had made it from a hotel corridor while Adrien attended an awards dinner downstairs. "I didn't do much." "You listened," she said. "That was more than anyone else was doing." When the call ended, the next stakeholder offered a different story but the same reason. Elliot had listened, remembered, and warned people before efficient decisions became humiliating ones. None of it had felt like influence to him. It had felt like basic decency. Northstar's campaign was producing the opposite of what Victor intended. Every attempt to expose Elliot uncovered another relationship built without Adrien's knowledge. That should have felt like victory. Instead, Elliot noticed the way Adrien was staring at the growing list of stakeholders willing to defend him, and unease settled beneath his ribs. "You thought they stayed because of you," Elliot said quietly. Adrien did not deny it. "I thought they stayed because Vale Meridian gave them reasons to." Maybe it did. Elliot straightened the pen beside his notes, then another beside it. Adrien noticed the movement immediately. Before he could speak, Mara entered carrying a new report. "We found something." She placed the document between them. "Northstar's outreach isn't random. Hale is contacting almost every stakeholder Elliot spoke to during the last 3 major governance crises." Adrien scanned the list. His expression changed from anger to something more careful. How did he know who they were? That's the problem. Mara turned to the final page. "There's no central record. Most of these conversations were never logged as corporate meetings. But whoever fed Hale data had access to enough fragments, event rosters, visitor records, old message headers, to reconstruct patterns we never thought to compare." Elliot looked down at names spanning nearly 4 years, people he had met at dinners, fundraisers, hospital openings, employee events, places where he had never thought of himself as representing Vale Meridian at all. Victor Hale had somehow mapped a network even Elliot had never realized existed. Adrien's hand settled beside the report. close to Elliot's without touching it. He knows there's something here, Adrien said. Elliot stared at the list. They were finally beginning to understand what Northstar was hunting. The contradiction was that neither of them yet understood how much of Vale Meridian had already come to depend on it. The first sign that everyone had misunderstood Elliot's role came from a spreadsheet no one had thought to compare against his name. Mara brought it into Adrian's office before 8 the next morning, along with 4 years of stakeholder retention data and a look that made Elliot forget the coffee cooling beside his hand. I stopped searching for meetings involving Elliot, she said. I searched for relationship failures instead. Adrien moved beside her as she opened the file. Red-marked partnerships that had reached formal dispute. Yellow-marked relationships that had come within 30 days of termination, withdrawal, or litigation. Beside each crisis was a date showing when the relationship stabilized. Mara added another column. Elliot recognized the dates immediately. A hospital fundraiser, a pension dinner, an employee memorial, 2 charity boards, a delayed flight where he had spent 40 minutes listening to a union trustee complain about Vale Meridian's finance division. That can't be all of them, Elliot said. It isn't. Mara changed the filter. 11 more rows appeared. In 9 cases, Elliot had spoken to someone connected to the dispute within days of the relationship recovering. Adrien did not move. Correlation isn't causation. I thought that too. Mara opened a second document. So I called them. She had asked one question without mentioning Elliot. What had convinced them not to walk away from Vale Meridian? The answers were short enough to fit on a single page. He listened before defending the company. He remembered what our staff had been promised. He warned us before the decision became public. He never treated our concern like leverage. One response came from Westbridge's chairwoman. I did not trust Vale Meridian. I trusted that Elliot Vale would tell us if staying became indefensible. Elliot read that line again. Across the desk, Adrien's face had gone very still. How many of the 17 relationships that nearly broke? Mara paused. 13 named Elliot directly or described an interaction we can trace to him. That was the moment the last 4 days changed shape. Elliot had believed Northstar was mapping him because Victor Hale had discovered an unexpected weakness in Adrien's defenses. Adrien had believed Elliot possessed useful informal access that could help protect the company. Both explanations were too small. Elliot was not standing near Vale Meridian's trust network. In ways nobody had measured, he had become part of it. Adrien walked to the window, then turned back. How much revenue is attached to those 13 relationships? Mara gave him the number. Elliot watched Adrien absorb it and almost wished she had not answered. Money was the language Adrien understood fastest, and Elliot suddenly hated the possibility that his husband would finally see him clearly only because someone had assigned a value to what he did. He reached for the report and straightened its edge against the desk. Adrien noticed. Don't. Elliot's fingers stilled. Don't what? Decide what I'm thinking before I say it. Adrien came back to the desk. I asked for the number because Hale knows it. If he understands this network before we do, he knows exactly which relationships to break. And now you know what I'm worth. The sentence escaped more quietly than Elliot intended. Adrien's expression changed. Not anger. Something closer to recognition. Is that what you think this is? Elliot looked down at the names. People notice me when I'm useful. It's usually temporary. The room went silent. Elliot regretted saying it almost immediately. It was too close to an old truth he preferred to keep practical. Adrien had married a man who required little space and created fewer problems. Even affection between them had learned to live inside that arrangement. Adrien sat across from him rather than retreating behind his desk. I thought Westbridge stayed because I gave them better terms, he said. I thought Calder stayed because they respected my results. I thought Mercer backed down because they knew I would outlast them. A humorless breath left him. Apparently, I've spent years congratulating myself for victories I didn't understand. Elliot looked up. Adrien continued, quieter now. And I didn't understand you. There was no apology attached to it, which somehow made the admission feel more honest. Elliot could have accepted an apology too easily. This was harder. Adrien allowing the fact of his own blindness to remain in the room without trying to manage it. Mara's tablet chimed before either man could say more. She read the notification and her expression tightened. 3 stakeholders just rejected Northstar's request for a joint statement against Vale Meridian. Adrien turned. Why? They sent their responses directly to Elliot. She placed the tablet between them. One message came from Calder, another from Westbridge. The third belonged to a labor investment coalition Adrien had spent 2 years trying to win over. The wording differed, But the condition was essentially the same. They would remain engaged with Vale Meridian as long as Elliot remained involved and could independently confirm that negotiations were being conducted in good faith. Adrien read all three. They're making you a condition. Elliot felt no triumph. A week ago, being overlooked had protected him. Now his name could move capital, stabilize negotiations, and make him the most obvious pressure point in Adrien's entire organization. That means Hale won't stop. No, Adrien said. It means he'll stop treating you like a way to get to me. His gaze settled on Elliot. He'll start treating you as the thing he has to remove. The distinction tightened something in Elliot's chest. Adrien closed the stakeholder report, but instead of taking it away, he pushed it toward Elliot. I need you involved in every decision affecting these relationships. Elliot almost smiled at the wording. Need. Adrien heard it. For once, he did not defend himself. Yes. Then he added, and I need to learn the difference between needing your judgment and deciding I'm entitled to it. Elliot stared at him. It was the first thing Adrien had said all week that carried no strategic advantage at all. Mara quietly left them alone. Adrien unlocked a restricted board file and turned the screen toward Elliot. There's something I haven't shown the executive team yet. If you're going to help decide what happens next, you see what I see. Elliot took the tablet. For the first time in their marriage, Adrien was not positioning him behind the CEO, beside the CEO for appearances, or in front of him as protection. He was giving Elliot access to the same battlefield. Outside the office, Northstar was still attacking Vale Meridian. Inside it, the objective had changed. Adrien no longer needed to discover whether his plain husband was useful. He needed to protect a network built on Elliot's trust without turning Elliot himself into another asset to control. And the more indispensable Elliot became, the harder that distinction was going to be. The first consequence of Elliot becoming indispensable arrived before launch. Vale Meridian lost the luxury of pretending he was private. Calder, Westbridge, and the Labor Investment Coalition requested that Elliot attend the emergency stakeholder session scheduled for the following morning, and Northstar responded by filing a formal governance complaint accusing Adrien of using his husband as an unofficial representative without oversight. Legal wanted Elliot removed from every negotiation until the complaint was resolved. The stakeholders wanted the opposite. Adrien could satisfy one side or the other, but not both. If I disappear now, Hale wins the argument before anyone investigates it, Elliot said. They were alone in Adrien's office, the restricted board file open between them. It contained the contingency models Adrien had not yet shared with his executives. Credit failures, partner defections, emergency asset sales, the ugly arithmetic of what happened if Northstar convinced enough institutions to abandon Vale Meridian at once. Adrien rested both hands on the desk. If you stay visible, he'll build the complaint around every conversation you've ever had. Then let him. Adrien's eyes narrowed. You say that as if consequences become harmless when you volunteer for them. No. I'm saying they should be mine to accept. That stopped him. Elliot reached toward the documents and straightened the top page. Adrien quietly rotated it crooked again. Elliot stared at him. Did you just do that on purpose? I wanted to see if you'd notice. You run a multinational corporation, and yet I remain capable of sophisticated experiments. Despite himself, Elliot smiled. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it loosened something that had been tight between them since Northstar began closing in. Then Elliot saw the proposed response plan on Adrien's screen, and the warmth disappeared. Vale Meridian could protect its immediate credit position by terminating 2 regional contracts and shifting the losses onto suppliers with weaker negotiating power. Financially, it worked. Humanly, it would ruin businesses that had remained loyal through the crisis. No, Adrien followed his gaze. It buys us 6 months. By making everyone who trusted us pay for Hale's attack. It keeps 40,000 employees from facing a larger collapse, and teaches every stakeholder supporting me that my principles disappear the moment they become expensive. Adrien moved around the desk. This isn't about your principles. Elliot looked at him. That is exactly what Hale wants you to believe. The room went quiet again, but this silence was different from the old ones. Adrien was not waiting for Elliot to surrender. He was actually considering the cost of listening. Elliot softened his voice. You told me I should see what you see. So let me tell you what I see. Northstar thinks your weakness is that you control everything when you're afraid. If you answer this attack by sacrificing the people with the least power, Hale doesn't need to expose hypocrisy. We'll demonstrate it for him. Adrien turned toward the windows. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. When he finally faced Elliot again, The decision had already changed something in his expression. We reject the supplier cuts. Elliot had expected another argument. That worsens the liquidity forecast. I know. Your board will hate it. I know that too. Adrien closed the model. Find another path with Mara and finance. One that doesn't spend the trust you built before I understood it existed. It was the first time Adrien had accepted a strategic loss because Elliot had drawn a moral boundary. The consequence came immediately. 2 directors threatened to call an emergency vote challenging Adrien's authority, and the finance team warned that Vale Meridian would have less than 3 weeks to secure replacement credit if the regional bank did not renew. Northstar had not grown stronger. Adrien had voluntarily made his own position harder. That evening, long after most of the executive floor had emptied, Elliot found Adrien sitting alone with his tie loosened and an untouched dinner beside him. The ruthless alpha CEO who could silence a boardroom with a glance was staring at a cash flow projection as if he could intimidate numbers into changing. Elliot set a fresh coffee beside him. That one was cold hours ago. Adrien looked at the cup, then at him. You keep track of things no one asks you to. Someone has to. Is that why you did all of it? Elliot knew what he meant. Calder. Westbridge. The clinic. Years of conversations nobody had noticed. I know what it feels like when people decide what you're worth before you speak. His fingers rested against the edge of Adrien's desk. After a while, you learn to make yourself useful enough that they keep you around. It's easier than asking whether they actually want you there. Adrien's expression tightened. Elliot regretted the honesty, but not enough to take it back. I did that with you too, Adrien said. Elliot met his eyes. Yes. No defense came. No explanation. Adrien simply absorbed the answer. Then he pushed the new financing plan toward Elliot. Tomorrow, I'm going to ask the board to accept a smaller asset sale and give up the supplier cuts. If they refuse, I could lose operational control. You still want my opinion? Especially if it's no. Before Elliot could answer, Adrien's phone lit up. Mara had forwarded a message intercepted from Northstar's legal team. Victor Hale was no longer trying to discredit Elliot's informal influence. He was preparing to use it against Adrien directly, arguing that Elliot had become an unaccountable power center whose involvement proved Adrien had lost control of his own company. Elliot read the message once, then again. Northstar had adapted. The battle was no longer about whether Elliot mattered. It was about forcing Adrien to choose between the authority he had spent his life protecting and the husband whose influence he had finally learned to respect. Adrien closed the message and looked at Elliot. Tomorrow, we stop defending the old version of Vale Meridian. Elliot glanced at the plan between them. And if the board won't follow? Adrien's answer came without bravado. Then we find out what respecting your judgment actually costs me. Northstar struck before Vale Meridian's emergency board meeting even began. At 8:12 a.m., Victor Hale filed a petition demanding an independent governance review and attached something far more damaging than accusations. An internal Vale Meridian contingency memorandum authorizing Adrien to suspend Elliot's stakeholder access, disavow his informal communications, and assign legal responsibility to him if the company's credit position deteriorated beyond a defined threshold. Elliot read the first page in silence. The document had Adrien's authorization code at the bottom. It had been created during the first strategy meeting 2 days earlier, after Northstar had begun portraying Elliot's informal influence as a governance risk. Adrien had authorized it while legal was still arguing that Elliot could become a liability, before he sat beside Elliot and asked what he wanted, before he rejected the supplier cuts, before last night, when he had promised to find out what respecting that judgment would cost. Mara had already found the route Hale used to obtain it. The director caught with Northstar's proxy on the first night had created a hidden mirror of Vale Meridian's internal archive through a service credential that survived his suspension. Even after his personal access was revoked, the mirror had continued copying compliance, board, legal, event, and message metadata files. Northstar had used those fragments to reconstruct Elliot's unlogged relationships, and the same breach explained Victor's gray compliance folder, the anonymous correspondence packet, and now the contingency memorandum. The discovery closed one mystery and made the page in Elliot's hands worse. Hale had not invented Adrien's contingency. He had simply stolen it before Adrien chose what to do with it. Elliot. Adrien's voice came from across the conference room. Elliot kept reading. The language was clinical. If necessary, Vale Meridian could characterize Elliot's past conversations as unauthorized personal activity, creating distance between the corporation and the very trust network, now keeping several stakeholders from walking away. It was exactly the kind of plan Adrien would build. Ugly, efficient, survivable. Was this real? Elliot finally looked up. Adrien did not hide behind legal phrasing. Yes. Mara and two attorneys stood near the far wall, but nobody moved. Did you intend to use it? When it was drafted, I intended to keep every option available. Elliot set the memorandum down carefully. He noticed the folder beside it was crooked. His hand did not move to fix it. Adrien noticed that too. That isn't what I asked. I know. Adrien stepped closer, then stopped before reaching the chair beside Elliot. At the time, I believed your involvement could become a liability. I authorized a contingency that would separate you from Vale Meridian if keeping you connected threatened the company. The words should not have surprised Elliot. That was the problem. Somewhere beneath the trust of the last few days, beneath Adrien choosing the harder financing plan and admitting he had never understood Elliot, an older truth had been waiting patiently. People noticed Elliot when he became useful. When usefulness became dangerous, they found a way to put distance between themselves and him. Northstar had not invented that wound. Victor had simply found Adrien's signature underneath it. So Hale doesn't need to convince anyone you used me, Elliot said. You wrote down exactly how you planned to discard me afterward. Adrien's face tightened. I wrote it before I understood what you were actually doing. You understood I was your husband. Silence followed. This time Adrien had nothing strategic to put into it. Outside the conference room, the consequences were already spreading. Calder suspended its 48-hour commitment. Westbridge requested clarification on whether Elliot's previous conversations had been officially recognized. The Labor Coalition postponed its statement of support. Northstar had found the one attack capable of damaging Elliot's trust capital without proving Elliot had done anything wrong. Make everyone wonder whether Adrien himself believed Elliot could be sacrificed. Mara's phone buzzed again. The board moved the meeting up. 20 minutes. One attorney stepped forward. We still have a path. If Mr. Vale signs a statement acknowledging that his past stakeholder communications were personal and not authorized by Vale Meridian, we can contain the governance exposure. The board will preserve Adrien's control while the review proceeds. Elliot looked at the lawyer, then at Adrien. There it was. The shield again, only cleaner this time. No public humiliation. No dramatic betrayal. Just a signature that would protect Adrien by making Elliot smaller. Adrien's voice turned cold. Leave us. The room emptied. When the door closed, Elliot remained seated. Tell me you aren't considering it. Adrien's answer took too long. If you sign, I can prevent the board from using this to remove me today. Elliot felt something inside him settle rather than break. Thank you. Adrien frowned. For what? For answering honestly. Elliot stood. Because now I know what the last few days meant. That isn't fair. No. Fair would have been knowing this existed before you handed me restricted files and told me we were making decisions together. Adrien stepped toward him. I was going to revoke it. Going to. Elliot's voice stayed quiet. After I proved useful enough? Pain crossed Adrien's expression, brief and unguarded. Elliot could not comfort him for it. You said people notice you when you're useful, Adrien said. I heard you. You heard me after you had already built a mechanism for surviving me. Adrien stopped. Elliot removed his Vale Meridian access badge and placed it on the table. I won't sign your statement. I also won't attend the board meeting as your advisor. Elliot, if you walk out now, Hale gets exactly what he wants. No. Hale wants you to force me to stay useful. Elliot pushed the badge toward him. I'm choosing not to. For the first time since this began, Adrien looked afraid. Not angry. Not calculating. Afraid. His eyes dropped to the badge as if it carried more weight than every board vote upstairs. If you leave, I may lose operational control today. Elliot swallowed the instinct to make that easier for him. Then decide what you're willing to lose without making me pay for it. He walked out before Adrien could answer. By the time Elliot reached the lobby, Northstar's petition was public and Vale Meridian's board had formally presented Adrien with two options. Activate the contingency, issue the distancing statement, and retain enough votes to survive the challenge. Or revoke it, accept full responsibility for Elliot's involvement, and trigger an immediate confidence vote Adrien was now expected to lose. Victor Hale had finally narrowed the war to a single choice. Adrien could protect the company by proving Elliot had always been a shield, or he could protect Elliot's agency and risk losing everything he had spent his life controlling. Adrien revoked the contingency at 9:07 a.m., 8 minutes before the board's confidence vote. He did it in writing, under his own authorization code, and copied every director, Calder, Westbridge, the Labor Investment Coalition, and North Star's legal team. The message was brief. Elliot Vale's communications would not be disavowed, reassigned, or used to shield Vale Meridian from responsibility. Adrien accepted full corporate accountability for every decision made under his leadership. If the board wanted his position, they would have to take it without using his husband to get there. The effect was immediate. 2 directors who had promised to support Adrien withdrew their votes. Vale Meridian's general counsel warned that the company could lose operational control before noon. Adrien walked into the boardroom anyway. Victor Hale was already there as North Star's representative, wearing the same measured smile he had worn the night Elliot first noticed the gray compliance folder. A dramatic gesture, Victor said. You've always preferred those. Adrien took his seat. You mistook control for certainty. Victor glanced at the empty chair beside Adrien. Your husband finally understood what happens to people who stand too close to you. Adrien's face remained still. No, he understood it before I did. Across town, Elliot read Adrien's revocation on his phone in the back of a car he had told to take him home. He read it once, then again. There was no request attached. No message telling him to return. No promise that Adrien would make everything right if Elliot helped him survive. Adrien had removed the contingency without knowing whether Elliot would ever stand beside him again. That was the first choice Adrien had made in this crisis that gave him nothing in return. Elliot told the driver to turn around. When he reached Vale Meridian, the confidence vote had already begun. Security recognized him, but his access badge still lay on Adrien's conference table upstairs. Elliot stopped at the desk. I'm not here as an employee or advisor. The guard hesitated. Then how should I list you? Elliot looked toward the elevators. As myself. Mara met him on the 38th floor. Relief crossed her face, but she did not try to steer him toward the boardroom. Adrien told us not to contact you. Good. Elliot handed her his coat. Then this is my decision. Inside, Victor was explaining why Adrien's revocation proved he had surrendered control of informal stakeholder influence to an unaccountable spouse. Several directors looked persuaded. Adrien did not interrupt him. Elliot entered before Victor finished. The room changed. Not dramatically. No one gasped. But 3 directors straightened, and the Calder representative near the window closed the document she had been reading. Victor's voice slowed. Adrien turned. For a moment, the ruthless CEO disappeared from his expression completely. Elliot saw only the man who had watched him leave and chosen not to drag him back. Adrien started to rise. Elliot gave the smallest shake of his head. Stay? Adrien understood and remained seated. Elliot took the empty chair at the far end of the table, not beside him. Victor recovered first. Mr. Vale. Convenient timing. Not particularly. Elliot placed his phone on the table. I was halfway home. A few eyes shifted toward Adrien. Elliot continued before anyone could turn the moment into reconciliation theater. I'm not here to defend Adrien's judgment. Some of it has been indefensible. Victor smiled. On that, at least, we agree. No. You agree because you think his mistakes make the rest of us easier to own. The smile faded. Elliot opened the stakeholder messages he had received that morning. Calder would maintain its position if governance protections were strengthened. Westbridge would renew negotiations if supplier liabilities were not shifted downward. The labor coalition would remain involved only if future commitments included independent review and direct stakeholder access. None of them had promised loyalty to Adrien. All of them had offered terms Elliot believed could survive without fear, bribery, or personal favors. You spent 4 days mapping everyone who trusted me, Elliot said to Victor. You assumed that meant I controlled them. Victor leaned back. Doesn't it? No. That's why you can't take them from me. Elliot slid the conditions toward the directors. They don't follow me because I can punish them. They trust me because I've never asked them to trade their interests for mine. Silence spread across the table. This time it belonged to Elliot. Victor looked toward Calder's representative. North Star can improve every financial term on that page. She met his eyes. That was never the problem. Westbridge's director pushed North Star's proposal away. Another followed. Then another. Victor's coalition had been built on leverage, cheaper credit, pressure, private incentives, fear of instability. Elliot's network had been built over years on something slower and harder to purchase. When Victor finally looked back at him, the contempt from their first meeting was gone. What do you want? Elliot could feel Adrien watching him, but for once he did not look back for permission. Independent governance review. Supplier protection stay. Stakeholder access becomes formal instead of hidden behind private relationships. And North Star withdraws its petition before we discuss anything else. Victor's jaw tightened. You're in no position to dictate terms. Calder's representative stood. He as if our capital depends on them. Westbridge followed. The Labor Coalition representative closed his folder and rose as well. It was not theatrical submission, but in a room built entirely on power, the meaning was unmistakable. Victor remained seated for several seconds, then stood last. His gaze dropped briefly to the terms Elliot had placed before him. "We'll withdraw the petition." He inclined his head toward Elliot, controlled and unwilling, but unmistakably deferential. The North Star attorneys beside him closed their folders and stepped back from the table, waiting until Elliot had finished before anyone spoke again. The man who had once looked through Adrian's plain husband now had to accept conditions from him, and the people who had entered expecting Elliot to be the weak point were taking their cue from him instead. Across the table, Adrien said nothing. That mattered more than Elliot expected. He did not claim the victory, translate Elliot's terms, or step forward to take control of the room again. He let Elliot finish. By noon, the confidence vote was suspended pending the new governance agreement. North Star's petition was withdrawn, and the immediate threat to Vale Meridian had broken. The company was not saved by Adrian's ruthlessness, and Elliot had not saved it because Adrien asked him to. He had chosen the terms himself. When the room finally emptied, Adrien remained at one end of the table and Elliot at the other. Between them lay the documents that had nearly ended Adrian's career and their marriage. Adrian's voice was quiet. "You came back." Elliot gathered his papers. "For the people who trusted me." Adrien absorbed that without flinching. "I know." Elliot looked at him then. The war was over. The harder question was what remained when Adrien no longer needed a shield and Elliot no longer needed to stay. 3 days after North Star withdrew its petition, Vale Meridian's board approved the governance agreement Elliot had put on the table. Supplier protection stayed intact. Stakeholder access became formal, documented, and independent of Adrian's office. Calder restored its commitment. Westbridge resumed negotiations, and the confidence vote that had nearly ended Adrian's control of the company was formally canceled. The strangest part was Elliot's name on the final resolution. Not as Adrian Vale's husband. Not as an informal intermediary. The board recognized him as an independent stakeholder liaison with authority to review the relationships he had spent years protecting without a title. When Mara handed him the signed copy, Elliot stared at it longer than he expected. "You look disappointed," she said. "I'm deciding whether this counts as becoming exactly what I spent 4 years avoiding." Mara smiled. Power. Meetings. That made her laugh, and Elliot let himself join her. The building felt different now. Not safer, exactly. More honest. People who had once looked past him now stopped to greet him, but the attention no longer had the same sting. Some of it was respect. Some of it was embarrassment. Elliot had stopped trying to sort the difference. He no longer needed every room to agree on his value. That afternoon, he found Adrien alone in the executive boardroom where the crisis had begun. The long table was empty except for 2 folders and a cup of coffee cooling beside Adrien's hand. "That's going to be terrible in 5 minutes," Elliot said. Adrien looked at the cup. "You've been saying that for years. You've been ignoring me for years. I'm working on one of those things." Elliot took the seat across from him. Not beside him. Adrien noticed, but did not ask him to move. That mattered. "The board approved your appointment," Adrien said. "I know. It reports independently." "I know that too." Adrien folded his hands. "You can disagree with me publicly. Now you're making it sound attractive." A faint smile touched Adrien's mouth, then disappeared as quickly as it came. "Elliot, I'm not going to tell you that the contingency didn't mean what it meant." Elliot's expression settled. Adrien continued before he could answer. "I built a way to keep control by making you smaller. I told myself it was prudent. I told myself every responsible CEO needed an exit strategy." He looked down at the table for a moment. "The truth is, I had already decided that losing authority would be worse than losing your trust." Elliot let the silence stay. There had been a time when he would have rushed to soften a confession like that, especially from Adrien. Making other people comfortable had always been one more way to remain useful. He did not do it now. And now, Adrien met his eyes. "Now I know I can survive losing control." His voice lowered. "I'm less certain I want to survive becoming the kind of man who earns your absence." Elliot felt the words land, but he did not mistake them for repair. Words had never been the missing piece. Choice was, "You revoked the contingency before you knew I'd come back." "Yes." "You told everyone not to contact me." "Yes." "You gave up the votes." Adrien nodded. "I would do it again." Elliot watched him carefully. "Even if I hadn't returned?" The pause was brief, but real. "Especially then. Otherwise it would only have been another strategy to keep you." That answer reached somewhere deeper than the apology Elliot had once thought he wanted. He looked toward the glass wall, where the city stretched beyond the building in gray afternoon light. For years, he had believed being easy to keep was safer than asking whether he was wanted. Adrien had not created that belief, but he had benefited from it. Now, for the first time, Elliot was being offered something that could not be confused with usefulness. Space. I'm not staying because the company needs me, Elliot said. I know. And I'm not staying because you changed one policy. I know that too. Elliot looked back at him. I'm staying because I want to see who you are when asking becomes a habit. Adrien's face changed slowly, the guarded control giving way to something quieter. That sounds less romantic than I hoped. You married a man who complains about crooked stationery. I've made peace with disappointment. Elliot almost smiled. His gaze fell to the folder between them. It was slightly crooked, deliberately crooked. Adrien had done it again. Elliot reached toward it, then stopped. Adrien watched his hand. You're not going to fix that. I'm considering personal growth. I don't like it. This time they both smiled. The moment was small, almost absurd after board votes, legal threats, and millions of dollars moving, because people had finally listened to the man everyone called plain. That was why it mattered. Nothing was being negotiated. Nobody needed leverage. Adrien reached for his coffee, took one sip, and made a face. Elliot raised an eyebrow. Cold. Unnecessarily so. Tragic. You could have warned me. Elliot leaned back. I did. For years. Adrien laughed under his breath, then stood as voices gathered outside the boardroom. The executive committee was arriving for the first meeting under the new governance structure. For a second, habit seemed to take over. Adrien moved toward the head of the table while Elliot remained near the far side. Then Adrien stopped. He looked at the empty chair immediately to his right, then at Elliot. He did not gesture. He did not instruct. He simply waited. Elliot understood the offer for what it was. Not protection. Not positioning. Not possession. A choice. He picked up his folder and crossed the room. When the doors opened, the directors entered to find Adrian Vale already standing at the table. Elliot took the place beside him, not behind him and not in front of him. Victor Hale's people had once believed the plain husband was useful because nobody saw him coming. Adrien had once believed the same thing. Now the room looked at Elliot and waited for him to speak. Adrien glanced down at the pen between them. He nudged it slightly out of line. Elliot noticed. This time, he left it exactly where Adrien had put it.